Hi, everyone. Welcome. Dominic here, your host for the Mastermind series, and excited to introduce to you Stacy Reinert. Welcome, Stacy. Good to have you.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Stacy is the creator and co-host of Coffee and Catholics. It's a podcast that comes out, I think, twice a month, and it's a group of moms who come together and just chat about all of the topics that they believe are really important, and we'll get to all of that in just a moment. But first, Mastermind is a live series to meet the
Mhm.
minds and hearts of our creators, the leaders, and hosts, and people who support the Smart Catholic community. They devote their time and talent to mastering their vocation so that you can live a fuller life. So, Stacy, thanks again for joining us. Before diving into talking more about this podcast, I'd like to take a step back and get allow people to know, a little bit about you, who you are. What's your story? Is there a moment in your life where you began to realize I can't be who I was? I have to do something. I have to do something different. What is that story?
Okay. So, like you said, there's your life is going along, and I was pretty strong involved in church. My parents, when I first was younger, didn't go to church as often, but then went back to the church, and so I was baptized when I was 7. But still, they were Catholic, and we were still raised in the Catholic faith. We just weren't going to church until I was 6. So I was baptized when I was 7 on my 7th birthday, and just kind of was really strongly involved in church. And then I went to college, had some kind of fallen away a little bit, not totally. I like to compare, there's about 2 years of my life in college where I like to compare myself to one of those Macy's balloons in the parade with the wind going and the people having to hold on to the balloon. I feel like God put some really good tethering people in my life at that time. And then flash forward to 2013. My husband and I had a miscarriage. We had had one before our oldest child in 2010.
Sorry.
But I was further along this time, and I had seen purpose in our first miscarriage because I wouldn't have our oldest son if that pregnancy had gone all the way through. And so, um, but the second one, I was really frustrated with, and it was Holy Week of 2014. And our baby's due date was in February of 2014. And we lost our baby in July of 2013. And I went into confession on Holy Thursday and just let go of all this anger
Yeah.
and in confession, and did my penance. And then I went to church there. I worked in Stillwater at the time. I live in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And so I went to church there for Holy Thursday service, and we had our agape meal there. And I came home, and I told my husband I wanted to go to adoration at our church because they were having overnight adoration like you do during Holy Week. And so I went at midnight and I did adoration, and just kind of finishing that conversation because I had mass right after confession. So I was just kind of finishing that conversation with God in adoration. I heard this voice tell me, you're pregnant, right? And I was like, what? No, no, you're pregnant. And so that was about 12:30 in the morning on Good Friday. And I let that sit. I went to work. I was a teacher at the time, and went to work and did school and came home, and I just like, okay. So I took a test and we were pregnant. And it was that moment that I realized these people that God had been putting in my life, and he had been speaking through them, and he had been talking to me through adoration. I just kind of have always checked it up to, my conscience or that inner voice, or,
Uh-huh.
Jiminy Cricket kind of thing. And that was the moment that I realized that God had a plan for my life and that I needed to trust in him. And he had been talking to me through these people this whole time. And so, and it was probably the first time I also started the, the idea of sharing my story, because so many women go through miscarriages and don't talk about them. They don't know who to talk to about them. It's usually a
Yeah.
very private thing, and it
Hmm.
happens to 1 in 4 women. And so I started talking about my miscarriage, using social media to share my story. I share the anniversary of the day that we lost our baby and her due date.
Mhm.
Um, and I've had a lot of people come to me, private message me and ask me about my story. And so that was probably really the first time I started really sharing my story, which I didn't know what he had planned for that either until Coffee and Catholics. So,
So
yeah.
perfect segue there. Let's
Mhm.
Coffee and Catholics then is it's not just like a fun sort of side hobby or project, but it's something that emerges from who you are and the stories that you've been through. And I imagine the stories of these other women are collaborating with you. So tell us how Coffee and Catholics came about and kinds of topics that you all cover.
So, Coffee and Catholics, I had been reading a book, and I, this is right after the pandemic like had shut down. So this is April of 2020,
Hmm.
and I was reading, and this idea for a podcast just came to mind, and I was like, okay, well that's an interesting idea. And then these four women's names came to mind, um, and I was kind of like, are you sure? I'm like, I'm not so sure because Annie, who's one of my co-hosts, I had known from college through a mutual friend, but we weren't overly close with each other. So I knew who she was, but I didn't really know her very well. And then my friend Alicia, she had watched my daughter while I was working um, as a teacher here in Guthrie, and so I knew her pretty well, but we had only known each other for about maybe a year. And then Lauren, I had attended. Um, she has her own ministry called Gathering Manna, and she does a retreat called the Merciful Mama. And I had gone to that retreat
Hmm.
with my friend Alicia and another friend, Katie. And that was when I met Lauren, and that was as much I knew about her was from the retreat she had run. And then Noelle had just moved here. She had gotten a job with our archdiocese, and it was new in town. And I had told her, hey, let's have a play date, because she was trying to find some friends for her kids, and they're a homeschool family, and we're a homeschool family. So I was like, hey, let's hang out. But that's as far as I knew her. Like, we had one play date. And I was like, are you sure these four women are the women you want me to do this with? Because I'm like, I know I have a lot of wonderful, faithful Catholic women in my life. They're like, no, these four. You need to ask these four. So I picked up my phone right then. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I messaged them and said, hey, I have a crazy idea. Do you want to do this with me? And they said yes. And so we brainstormed and did Zoom meetings because it's the pandemic. And so and then in August of 2020 we released our first episode.
That's awesome. I love
And
the collaboration there. So what are the topics then? What do you cover? What's the focus of Coffee and Catholics?
so Coffee and Catholics, a Catholic women's talk show podcast, is about sharing our stories, where we look at women's issues through a Catholic lens,
Hmm.
and we share our personal stories that go with those topics.
Hmm.
And we also discuss strategies that we use as women and as mothers. And we do talk a lot about being from the mom perspective, because that's where we are in our life. But we try to also branch out to all women, whether that's single life or um, if you have a call to oh,
Yeah, like vocations
religious
or
life or
yeah,
yeah. I was like, well, they're all vocations. It's
yeah,
a
exactly.
religious vocation.
Yeah.
And so but we try to branch out to be um, relative to all women.
Hmm.
So even though a lot of our stories have to do with our kids, we also go back into our stories before we were kids. We talk about when we're working, because we've all been working moms. We've might right now be stay at home homeschooling moms, but my kids have been in school, and I've worked outside of the home, and I've worked in the home. And so our backgrounds kind of give us that connection to a lot of different groups in the Catholic women's community.
Oh, that's great. So you're going to get the variety of insights. Uh, Great. And so, okay, so we have a variety of different insights, and everybody's friends, which is always awesome. And then the topics that uh, you like to cover were sharing your stories, and then obviously your themes of like miscarriage. And what are some of the other ones that you've covered so far?
We've talked about natural family planning, and
Okay.
we've also talked about pornography, which was, it's really interesting to find out how much that affects women,
Mm,
and
yeah.
um, and people, usually consider that a issue with men, but it's
Hmm.
also can be an issue with women.
Hmm.
We've talked about Mary and how Mary has affected our lives. We've talked about um, having children in mass, because there's different camps
There's
about
a yeah.
having children in mass. And we've also talked about what other people are doing out there. Um, we did an interview back in January with an organization here in Oklahoma that helps homeless mothers learn different skills like cooking and taking care of their babies and things like that. And we did an interview with them back in January
Hmm.
for Respect Life Month.
Hmm.
And we're not always perfect at it. We try to go with like, with what's going on in the month. So we've talked about, Holy Week. We talked about what resources and things that we use during Holy Week,
Hmm.
and just a wide variety of things. So
Well, great. That's great. There's one thought that came to mind, and I've forgotten it, and now it's probably gonna bug me at 3 a.m. So let's go to the the next prompt. Maybe I'll remember it. But um, yeah. See, there it is, just bugging me. Anyhow, the next question I'd like to ask you. One of the big sort of ideas or the themes that we're working with in the Smart Catholics community is the idea of being a faith first responder. And literally taking inspiration from how the medical world works. So the Holy Father has described the church as a field hospital, and if that's the case, then we as first responders are the frontier, that first point of contact with friends, family, other people who are wounded or who have never heard the message or maybe need to see a new witness, to inspire the words, that sort of thing. So I'm curious what comes to your mind when you hear like the word of first responder, and is that something you're doing in your own life, and how?
um, when you sent me this question, it was really hard for me to. This was probably the hardest one. But then
Hmm.
I started thinking about it was really funny because we were in the car, my kids and I were in the car, and we have a habit of when we hear a police siren or a fire truck or an ambulance, we say a Hail Mary, and then we have a prayer right after the Hail Mary that says, "Please help the first responders and the people they're going to help."
Hmm.
And I was, pondering this question, and I kind of lingered on and the people they're going to help. And I think that's really what my personal mission is using stories to help others know that they are not alone and know
Hmm.
that there is hope, and to be a little bit of Christ light to them so that can they know that there's more to the plan. God has a plan for all of us, and we just have to trust in that plan. And
Hmm.
that, yes, you can feel like you're in a storm, but just like the disciples when Jesus was asleep and they're like, why are you asleep? And he's like, didn't you trust that I take care of you? And I think that when Lauren, Noelle, Alicia, Annie, and I share our stories, we're telling people that yes, there are storms, but we've come past our storms, and there's a hope that they will get past their storms also. So I think, as being a first responder, I think that that's really where my work is sharing that story to let people know that there's hope and they're not alone. Because I think a lot of times we do feel that pull. And so
Yeah, beautifully said. I love how you tied that into literally seeing them on the side of the road and then actually reflecting on that beautifully. I love how you said that. Well, let's you may have already just done this now and sort of stolen my last question out, but if I
sorry.
were to ask you to If you had 1 minute to share a message with the world, what would you say?
I would say that there is hope, that you are not alone, that God has a plan for you, and you have a special job that only you can do. And even when we're broken, He'll use that brokenness to get us where we need to go.
Beautiful. Thank you. Stacy, it was wonderful to spend a little time with you. Thanks again for coming on and joining us today.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
oh, sure. For everybody who either watched this live or who is watching the replay, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with the one friend that you think would really like to see it. And then come and regroup with us in the free Catholic community on smartcatholics.com. We're free of trolls and toxicity. We're faithful to the Holy Father, Pope Francis, and the Church. And we are committed to a culture of kindness and learning. Does that sound like you? Well, then come and join us. We look forward to meeting you. Thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And we look forward to joining you on the next episode of Mastermind.